headlines on this Thursday afternoon, February 29th, here in South Korea. Doctors in training who have departed from their duties have until today to return to their respective hospitals to avoid any legal repercussion resulting from their collective action. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol sat down with his American counterpart Antony Blinken in Washington on Wednesday local time to address prospects of heightened provocations by North Korea in light of the parliamentary election here and the presidential election in the US. Plans are in the works by a number of European countries, including the UK and Sweden, to reopen their diplomatic missions in North Korea following pandemic-related closures in 2020. We are counting down the hours to the day's deadline for the return of doctors in training as set by the government amid their mass departure last week in protest of plans to boost the number of medical practitioners. Our Shin Se-byuk starts us off.
Thursday marks the return-to-work deadline set by the government for doctors protesting the planned medical school quota increase. The government has called on doctors to resume work by February 29th, stating those who comply will not face any legal penalties. In a final step that would allow the government to file a criminal complaint over the collective action, Health Ministry officials visited the homes of trainee doctors in person on Wednesday to deliver return-to-work orders. Previously, these orders had been issued through mail or text messages. Those who do not return to work by today will face suspension of their medical licenses or additional legal action. Meanwhile, Interior Minister Lee Sang-min in a briefing on Thursday announced a set of measures to bolster medical services. Those include increasing the number of medical school professors at national universities by 1,000 by 2027, addressing concerns that higher medical school quotas might undermine education quality. He also said the government will expedite the establishment of new metropolitan emergency medical situation rooms. These facilities, originally scheduled to open by May, are now slated to be fully operational starting next Monday. Amid rising tensions between doctors and the government, some residents are now making moves to return to their posts. The Health Ministry on Thursday, without providing the exact number of returning residents by hospital, said that over 294 trainee doctors have returned to their posts. In an effort to find a breakthrough with doctors, the Health Ministry has scheduled a discussion for 4 p.m. on Thursday in Seoul. The second Vice Minister of Health and Welfare, Park Min-soo, has reached out to the resigning resident doctors, inviting them for a dialogue, but despite multiple public invitations, Park has yet to secure successful dialogue. He has clarified that the meeting is open not just to the representatives from the Korean Intern Resident Association, but also to any resident doctor eager to join the conversation. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
In Washington earlier on Wednesday, Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol and his American counterpart Antony Blinken acknowledged the need of tangible preparations for heightened provocations by North Korea in light of the parliamentary election here and the presidential election in the US. Our foreign affairs correspondent Wintry reports.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol met with his American counterpart Antony Blinken in Washington on Wednesday local time and discussed ways to cooperate in order to better respond to evolving North Korean threats. The hour-long meeting was their first bilateral sit-down since Cho took office last month. This comes amid concerns about North Korea's military cooperation with Russia and speculations that the regime could engage in more provocations ahead of parliamentary elections in South Korea in April and the U.S. presidential election in November.
We are one in condemning North Korea's increasingly provocative rhetoric and actions that violate multiple UN Security Council resolutions, including its export of munitions and ballistic missiles to Russia.
While noting that South Korea and the U.S. have always moved in lockstep, Cho highlighted that strengthening their trilateral coordination with Japan is essential for addressing common security challenges and promoting stability in the Indo-Pacific region. On global issues, he added that South Korea continues to stand together in supporting Ukraine and that it's also united in condemning Houthi attacks. Blinken, who will be visiting Seoul next month, said he's very much looking forward to being in South Korea and said the two countries' partnership is stronger than it's ever been.
We're working together on virtually every major challenge that we have to contend with around the world, as well as working together to build even greater opportunities for our people here in the United States and in South Korea.
Seoul's foreign ministry said the two sides also agreed to strengthen diplomatic efforts to cut off the sources of North Korea's illicit funding activities and revive interest in North Korean defectors, detainees, and prisoners of war. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, preparations are reportedly underway by a number of European countries looking to reopen their diplomatic missions in North Korea following pandemic-related closures back in 2020. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
In January 2020, North Korea began closing up its border in a bid to prevent the COVID-19 virus from spreading in its own country. Having one of the world's strictest border controls at the time, all European nations withdrew from their embassies in Pyongyang. However, 4 years on from their departure, a number of European embassies in the North Korean capital will reopen in the near future. According to a Reuters report on Wednesday, Britain's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office is discussing plans with the North Korean embassy in London for a technical and diplomatic delegation to visit Pyongyang. A spokesperson from the Foreign Office said it welcomes the return of some diplomats to Pyongyang and North Korea's move to reopen its borders, adding that it asked North Korea to allow entry for the international community, including all diplomats, UN agencies, and non-governmental humanitarian organizations. Sweden's special envoy for the Korean Peninsula, Peter Samneby, said there had been some progress regarding his return to Pyongyang. The return of North Korean diplomats to their overseas posts has also been a slow and gradual process. Last August, the regime cautiously began sending their ambassadors to pro-North Korean countries such as China, Russia, Mongolia, and Cuba. Other European nations are beginning the process of returning diplomats to Pyongyang, as the German Foreign Ministry said that it will begin inspecting their embassy, which had been left vacant for years before its ambassador returns. The Swiss Foreign Ministry is also discussing a visit to North Korea to resume humanitarian projects by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Switzerland has been conducting support projects for North Korea with the Development Cooperation Office in Pyongyang since 1997, which it withdrew from in March 2020. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has pledged tangible support for collaboration between Korean firms and Meta. The pledge was shared during talks with visiting Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg earlier on this Thursday. According to the Presidential Policy Secretary Song Tae-yoon, the half-an-hour meeting at the Yongsan office focused on future tech cooperation in cutting-edge technology, including AI. Underscoring Korea's firm standing in the global memory chip market, as well as Samsung's expansion in foundries and crucial hardware technologies for metaverse platforms, President Yoon forecasts the formation of an innovative ecosystem with global big tech companies. Household income rose in the fourth quarter of last year. According to Statistics Korea on this Thursday, the average monthly income per household amounted to 5.2 million won, or some $3,700, up almost 4% on year. The average real income per household adjusted for inflation was up by 0.5%. The agency is linking the latest rise to greater employment and public pension benefits. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is traveling beyond borders to seek broader support for Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression. Our Yoon covers his latest calls for solidarity.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been traveling around the world to drum up support for Ukraine to improve defensive capabilities against Russia at a time of faltering military support from Western allies. Zelenskyy was in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to push for a peace plan and the return of prisoners of war from Russia, which was followed by a two-day summit of 11 countries from southeastern Europe, along with officials from the European Union and other international organizations. Speaking at the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit held in Albania on Wednesday, Zelenskyy said the low ammunition supply is affecting the situation on the battlefield and called on leaders of Balkan countries for help. He also proposed holding a Ukraine-Balkan Defense Forum to strengthen arms cooperation. Albania was among the first countries to offer shelter to Ukrainian refugees and continues to voice full support for Ukraine. It has provided military assistance in the form of ammunition and training for the Ukrainian military. But Ukraine did not receive full support for its war against Russia at the meeting. Kremlin ally Serbia has refused to align with EU sanctions following Russia's invasion and continues to sign cooperation agreements with Moscow. Meanwhile, at the European Parliament in Strasbourg on Wednesday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen proposed that the European Union consider using profits from frozen Russian assets to buy military supplies for Ukraine. She urged the EU to do more on defense policy, adding that the threat of war for the EU may not be imminent, but it is not impossible.
It is time to start a conversation about using the windfall profits of frozen Russian assets to jointly purchase military equipment for Ukraine. There could be no stronger symbol and no greater use for that money than to make Ukraine and all of Europe a safer place to live.
Billions of euros worth of Russian assets are being held in Europe. Belgium has estimated the figure to be around $195 billion worth, and Prime Minister Alexander De Croo has said that he wants to use all the interest on those funds for Ukraine's reconstruction. Yoon, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., President Joe Biden and his rival Donald Trump noted quick victories in their respective parties' primaries in Michigan back on Tuesday. But pundits believe both candidates face much uncertainty in their efforts to secure this swing state during the presidential race in November. Our Wintry explains.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Donald Trump won their respective primaries in Michigan on Tuesday. Results from the primary so far indicate that the two are on course to face off in November's presidential election. Early results from Michigan, however, revealed some of their biggest political vulnerabilities and concerns. Mr. Trump has now swept the first 5 states on the Republican primary calendar, but there have been signs of struggles with some influential voter blocs that have favored former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley in previous contests. Ms. Haley's strongest performances on Tuesday night came in areas with college towns like Ann Arbor, home to the University of Michigan, and suburbs around Detroit. Mr. Trump, meanwhile, has underperformed with suburban voters and people with college degrees and faces a faction within his own party that believes he broke the law in one or more of the criminal cases against him. President Biden's victory in the Democratic primary also came with a warning as an uncommitted campaign organized by activists disillusioned with his handling of the war in Gaza made an impact. Michigan has the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the United States. In a statement, Mr. Biden did not directly acknowledge the uncommitted effort but praised the progress his administration has made with Michigan voters. Despite a recent tweak in rhetoric and a call for a pause in fighting, Biden and his team have stood by Israel's right to defend itself. Meanwhile, according to the Hamas-led health ministry, the death toll in Gaza is at nearly 30,000, mostly women and children. As the civilian death toll continues to rise, so too has the pressure on President Biden to publicly push for a ceasefire. 정은주, Arirang News.
The Brazilian Amazon recorded almost 3,000 outbreaks of fire in February, the highest for the month since recordings began 25 years ago. According to the National Institute for Space Research on Wednesday, the northern region of the rainforest is bearing the brutal brunt of the blazes. Experts are linking the rampant fire partly to climate change and to forest clearing for agriculture. Last year, the Brazilian Amazon was devastated by wildfires amid a severe drought between June and November. Back on the local front, time is of the essence in society today, especially where technology is concerned. That being said, a generative AI application developed by researchers here has proven to be the fastest in creating an image from a text command in just 2 seconds. Our Kim Dami has more.
Researchers input a sentence into the system. After entering a sentence that reads, "A realistic photo of an astronaut reading a book on Mars under the moon," 2 seconds later, the Koala 700M developed in South Korea is the first to come up with an image. Following that, Carlo, made by Kakao Brain, took 3.6 seconds to come up with an image, while DALL-E 2 and DALL-E 3, developed by OpenAI, took over 10 seconds each. Among generative AIs that convert text descriptions into images, Koala 700M is the fastest in the world. High speed is achieved by the development of knowledge distillation technology, which transfers knowledge from a large model to a smaller model without loss of validity.
Existing technologies can generate high-quality images but are slow. However, Koala has developed technology to generate images more quickly by lightweighting the large neural network model.
The researchers have also developed a model that incorporates visual intelligence technology into conversational AI. Named Kolava, it allows AI and humans to ask and answer questions about images or videos.
We plan to continue our research focusing not only on the technology of generating images from text, but also on the field of video generation.
The research team plans to expand the utility of the knowledge distillation technology, proven effective in image generation, to other areas, and develop a leading artificial intelligence. 김다미, Arirang News.
The Oscar-nominated film Past Lives is poised to play theatres here next week. And ahead of its much-awaited showing, its Korean-Canadian director Celine took time to share her thoughts about her work with the local audience. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
Celine's song didn't expect her movie to become this huge until about a year ago. 2023 was a stellar year for the Korean-Canadian director's debut film, Past Lives. Starring Greta Lee and Yoo Tae-oh, the film has clinched over 70 awards at numerous film festivals and is now setting its sights on the Oscars next month. Past Lives has earned 2 nominations, Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay. It all started when Song was drinking at a bar in New York with her husband and childhood friend.
None of them spoke each other's language, so I had to act as an interpreter. In the process, I got this special feeling that I was interpreting 2 sides of my identity, history, and personal narrative.
The film follows Nora, a playwright living in New York, as she reunites with her childhood sweetheart, Hae-sung, after 24 years following her emigration to Canada. This is where the concept of 인연, meaning destiny or fate in Korean, comes in. Even though the two are not together in this life, they believe their decades-long connection extends from their past lives and will continue into their next lives.
I believe 인연 is the only word that can describe the relationship between Hae-sung and Nora. While it's a Korean term, the emotion it signifies resonates universally. That's why people, regardless of their background, have shared with me that they understood its meaning after watching the film.
When I first read this scenario, I was touched by how it eloquently and simply explained what 인연 is.
Song weaved autobiographical elements into the film, drawing from her decade-long experience as a playwright, meeting her husband at an artist residency, and navigating the complexities of balancing multiple cultures. There is a reason for this.
I believe a personal story is essential when reaching out to an audience. If I want to make my creation meaningful to others, I believe I should delve into something only I can uniquely contribute or excel in.
Past Lives premieres in Korea on March 6th. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In Texas, a wildfire known as the Smokehouse Creek Fire, now the second largest in Texas history and the worst in 36 years, continues to burn through the Texas Panhandle region since starting on Monday afternoon. As of Wednesday, the fire has burned at least 850,000 acres of land and is 3% contained, according to the Texas A&M Forest Service. The extent of the damage from the fires is still being assessed, but the blaze has burned more than 3,300 square kilometers and jumped into parts of neighboring Oklahoma. Parts of multiple Texas counties were ordered to evacuate on Tuesday, schools were closed, and officials warned residents of potentially large property losses. Dry grass and warm temperatures on top of strong winds are fueling the blaze, making containment difficult. However, rainfall is forecast for Thursday morning. The funeral of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, seen as the most high-profile critic of Vladimir Putin, will take place in Moscow on Friday. Navalny died suddenly in a remote Arctic prison earlier this month. Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of Alexei Navalny, announced on Wednesday the date of his funeral. However, she expressed uncertainty about whether the funeral will go smoothly as planned. After Navalny's death, dozens of his supporters were detained by the authorities when they laid flowers at various memorial sites. Navalny's associates initially wanted to hold his funeral on Thursday, but no venues were willing to host it due to Putin's scheduled annual State of the Nation address to Russia's Federal Assembly. The funeral will now take place at the Church of the Icon of the Mother of God in Moscow. Afterward, Navalny will be buried in the nearby Borisovsky Cemetery. On Wednesday, the U.S. Senate's longest-serving party leader Mitch McConnell announced his decision to leave his position as the Republican Senate leader in November. The 82-year-old Kentucky senator has held a seat in the Senate since 1985 and has served as the leader of the Senate Republican Conference since 2007. Recently, several members of his conference have demanded he step down and make way for a younger, more Trump-aligned leader. Though he will no longer be in Senate leadership, he plans to remain in Congress through the remainder of his term, which expires in 2027. There's been a breakthrough in the fight against dengue fever with British biotech company Oxitec's development of genetically modified mosquitoes to combat a surge in cases in Brazil. Brazil is currently facing a significant outbreak of the dengue virus, which is being fueled by the country's hot rainy season. As of February 27th, over 973,000 cases of dengue have been reported this year in Brazil alone. Oxitec's mosquitoes carry a gene that kills female offspring, which can transmit diseases before they mature. According to an official from Oxitec, the mosquito population is 90% lower in areas where the company's mosquitoes have been released compared to other areas. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We are wrapping up the month on a cloudy note, but with rain in the southern parts of the country. Jeju is seeing showers, and it sure rains frequently there, while mountainous regions on the island are seeing snow with a heavy snow advisory being in place with up to 8 centimeters of snow in the forecast. Meanwhile, parts of Jeollado and Gyeongsang-Namdo province could see 1 to 5 centimeters of snow. The rest of the southern regions are having a rainy day. Well, this round of wet weather will bring spring cold. We can already feel the chill from sharp winds. Please brace for freezing conditions for the start of March. Afternoon highs are 1 to 8 degrees, lower than yesterday. Seoul and Daejeon top out at 8 degrees, but Gwangju, Daegu, Gyeongju are having breezier highs at just 7 degrees this afternoon. It will rain across Korea during the Independence Movement Day weekend, and the brief sprinkle will peak on Saturday morning before easing in the afternoon. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions. And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.
Yeah, it's so cool to see like the old traditional Korean stuff in a modern setting. Because when we see like exorcist movies, it's like Catholic stuff or whatever. What here is Korean stuff, so it's really cool.
아, 그게 무슨 말이야? 관이 열렸다니.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
On Issues and Insiders today, we address advances in Seoul-Tokyo ties amid a host of security challenges. So what is the latest on the bilateral diplomatic front? How far have the two countries advanced on the economic front? And are prospects of a summit between Japan and North Korea high? Welcome to yet another edition of Issues and Insiders. It's Thursday here in Korea, and I'm Min San-hee. Media reports from neighboring Japan claim Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is planning a trip to South Korea ahead of his hopes to directly engage North Korea over a broad range of concerns, including the issue of abduction of Japanese nationals by North Korean agents in the 1970s and 80s. For more on this, I have Dr. Pan Gil-chu at Korea University live on the line. Dr. Pan, welcome back.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
I also have Dr. Kim Yang-gyu at the East Asia Institute with us. Dr. Kim, it's good to see you again.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Ban, let's begin off then with your assessment of diplomatic ties between Seoul and Tokyo under the Yoon administration.
Well, I would like to assess that under the Yoon administration, the two countries are more cooperative, and the two leaders, President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida, are close individually and trust each other, leading the two countries to be more connected militarily as well as diplomatically. What made these ties possible? We need to take a look at the Yoon administration diplomatic architecture. I would say that the first season of Yoon administration diplomatic architecture can be defined as a security diplomacy, where South Korea intends to significantly enhance security cooperation with an ally and a security partner. This security diplomacy led to the strongest alliance in history, as shown the birth of NCG, Nuclear Consultative Group. The second item for Yoon administration security diplomacy would be security cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Previously, Japan was far from South Korea's security partner. South Korea and Japan have rarely engaged even diplomatically. However, when the Yoon administration was inaugurated in 2022, it had to address serious challenges from both more heavily nuclear-armed North Korea and faltering international organizations. The remedy that the Yoon administration made was a trilateral relationship between South Korea, the United States, and Japan. This idea has been realized by the Camp David summit, as you all know. This trilateral summit helped greatly enhance the ROK-US alliance, but at the same time contributed to tackling the deadlocked ROK-Japan relationship. As of right now, officials from South Korea and Japan meet more often through this trilateral platform. These two countries step up security cooperation through this trilateral framework like TISA, Trilateral Information Sharing Arrangement. More importantly, South Korea and Japan have improved bilateral cooperation as well. Shuttle diplomacy between South Korea and Japan has revived to function. The deadlocked GSOMIA, General Security Military Information Agreement, has begun to fully functional. In the meantime, there are several agendas that South Korea and Japan have to deal with, which include history and wastewater release. However, I believe that the improved bilateral relationships help these issues be addressed gradually as time goes by.
Right, hopefully, of course. And Dr. Kim, keeping in mind what Dr. Pan has just said, do you suppose security concerns over North Korea's hostile weapons ambitions will continue to keep Seoul, Tokyo in close coordination on the diplomatic front?
Yes, indeed. I think Dr. Ban already mentioned beautifully and explained everything. But let me just add a couple of things. Especially since 2022, Pyongyang has been doing everything to make the nuclear threat to South Korea, Japan, and the United States as credible as possible. The regime passed a law on nuclear forces and then made it a part of the constitution, and thus making it illegal for Pyongyang to embark on denuclearization measures. And starting this year, Kim Jong-un even declared that he has a legal right to annihilate South Korea. But however, if there is an action, there is a reaction. The DPRK's action to protect the regime by making nuclear war threat led to reactions in Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, including Washington Declaration, Nuclear Consultative Group, as just Dr. Ban mentioned, and Camp David Summit, and numerous vice ministerial strategic dialogues, which have significantly reinforced the U.S. extended deterrence and integrated deterrence system in the region. And according to the recent Korea-Japan Joint Public Opinion Survey conducted by the East Asia Institute and the Genron NPO, more than 70% of the people, both Korea and Japan, want some level of security cooperation between the two countries, either information sharing or coordination body for joint actions. And about 10% of them in each country even believe a military alliance is needed. Can you believe this? Korea-Japan military alliance. So this is something that I've never expected about 5 or 6 years ago. And I think as long as there's action from DPRK to intensify military provocations, there will be a strengthening of bilateral cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo.
Right, so advances on the diplomatic front are clear then, Dr. Ban. And keeping that in mind, where do Seoul and Tokyo stand on bilateral economic initiatives?
To be honest, the improved diplomatic relationship between South Korea and Japan contributes to making their bilateral relationship better as well. As you might be aware, in March 2023, as Japan withdrew the exclusion of South Korea from the wild list, South Korea and Japan agreed to normalize their economic dependence. Furthermore, in November 2023, South Korea and Japan agreed to establish a supply chain for hydrogen and ammonia as part of the effort to enhance economic security. Their bilateral economic cooperation also includes the areas of semiconductors and quantum technology. Moreover, as of right now, the need for a more consolidated bilateral economic architecture is gaining momentum. For example, in December 2023, Chairman Choi Tae-won of SK Group suggested ROK-Japan Economic Cooperation Initiative, which includes numerous areas for bilateral cooperation such as energy, semiconductors, shipbuilding, mobility, batteries, and even tourism. But at the same time, the bilateral economic cooperation between South Korea and Japan is less active than cooperation through multilateral or unilateral platforms. The typical unilateral framework that South Korea and Japan attend together is obviously IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and the ROK-US-Japan Cooperative Architecture. In a nutshell, as of right now, I would say that these two countries are better at security cooperation than economic cooperation from a bilateral viewpoint.
Right, I see. And Dr. Kim, this next concern was something that Dr. Pan touched upon earlier on, but do differences over history between the two countries look to hinder greater advances on both the diplomatic and economic fronts?
Unfortunately, this will always be the case, but let me share some interesting findings from the joint public opinion survey that I just mentioned. The top 3 responses of both Korean and Japanese people to the question of what needs to be done to improve Seoul-Tokyo relations were all related to historical problems, from the historical education issue to Dokdo dispute. Interestingly, however, when it comes to defining this historical problem, the majority of South Koreans, ranging from 60 to 65%, think of wartime aggressions, textbook issues, forced labor, and comfort woman issue. On the contrary, Japanese respondents think of anti-Japanese education, excessive reactions regarding historical issues, and unfair media reports when they hear history problem. So you see, although everybody believes that the history problem should be addressed to open a new era for bilateral relations, they understand and perceive the same concept differently. This is why strengthening bilateral relations is so difficult. Both sides need to make persistent efforts to overcome this fundamental gap in their perceptions first, and this will take a lot of time.
Right, of course. Dr. Pan, moving forward, there is talk about a possible visit to Seoul by Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in March, that's next month, to discuss a number of issues, including Tokyo's efforts to engage Pyongyang, especially in light of a favorable response from North Korea's Kim Yo-jong regarding prospects of a summit between her brother and Prime Minister Kishida. First, then, what are your thoughts, Dr. Pan, regarding the possibility of a Kishida-Kim summit?
To start with, I'm not sure whether Prime Minister Kishida is really scheduled to visit South Korea, in the sense that Prime Minister Kishida visited Seoul in May last year, and it is rival time for the South Korean president to make a return visit to Tokyo based upon the logic of shadow diplomacy. Meanwhile, since this is not a strict rule at all, this order could be changed if there are specific events like Major League Baseball, which is scheduled to be held on 30 March. But it remains to be seen whether his visit happens really on the spot. If Prime Minister Kishida visits Seoul indeed, that visit is not simply going to be symbolic but substantial, in the sense that this visit means that order is going to be changed. Regardless of the feasibility of Prime Minister Kishida's visit to Seoul, as you mentioned earlier, the possibility of a Kishida-Kim summit is gaining attention. However, I don't think it is highly possible because, first, Kim Yo-jong's favorable comment toward Japan is strategically designed and Japan is well aware of North Korea's strategic calculation. The underlying logic that Kim Yo-jong made a favorable response to Japan has something to do with the fact that South Korea made a diplomatic relation with Cuba, North Korea's brother country, obviously. Cuba's diplomatic normalization seems to have shocked North Korea, as we can see North Korea's intentional attempts to exclude Cuba in its press. In addition, North Korea strategically intends to derail the newly emerged ROK-US-Japan security architecture and the ROK-Japan cooperative relationship while using a gray zone strategy. So Japan, as well as South Korea and the United States, will be careful not to be entrapped in North Korea's strategic calculation. Second, agendas between North Korea and Japan are colliding in many ways. The most important reason why Japan needs to engage with North Korea diplomatically is to address the issue of the Japanese adopted by North Korea. However, North Korea maintains the problem of all Japanese adoptees has been resolved while being reluctant to repatriate to Japan. If Prime Minister Kishida missed Kim Jong-un without bringing this agenda to the table, he is most likely to be punished politically by the domestic audience. When all these things are taken into consideration, I don't think the Kishida-Kim summit is feasible. Meanwhile, the return of Trump to the White House could change this mechanism and Japan's calculation.
Right. Dr. Kim, what are your thoughts? Do you also share this rather reserved outlook with regard to prospects of a Kishida-Kim summit? I mean, do you believe that the abduction issue perhaps will keep this particular summit from taking place?
Yes, absolutely. I think Dr. Bang already answered this question pretty well. So let me add a couple more details to the story. I just want to highlight that according to recent official statement of Prime Minister Kishida, Tokyo's position is twofold. One, the abduction issue is one of the highest priority issues for the Kishida administration, as it is a human rights issue and an issue with time constraints as the families of the victims continue to age. And two, Kishida is also determined to meet Kim Jong-un to address the abduction issue without setting any condition. However, like you just mentioned, Kim Yo-jong, the Supreme Leader's sister and the Vice Department Director of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party, said that DPRK and Japan can open up a new future, which means Pyongyang would welcome Kishida's visit to the DPRK only if the adoption issue and the nuclear and missile issues will not be on the table. She then, of course, qualified her statement that this is only her personal view and she is not in the position to officially comment on this. But we all know that, considering her position in the regime, you can see that Kim Jong-un will meet Kishida if they agree not to talk about abduction issue. But this issue is specifically the very reason why Kishida wants to meet Kim Jong-un. So there's a collision in the agenda setting, as just Dr. Ban just mentioned. So this is why many experts, including Dr. Ban and me, that the Kishida-Kim summit will not happen and warn that it is simply a tactic by Pyongyang to drive a wedge in Seoul, Washington, Tokyo trilateral cooperation by feeding fears to South Korea that Japan might unilaterally deal with the DPRK behind its back. And I agree with this analysis, and I believe the DPRK's Japan summit is highly unlikely unless Pyongyang shows some sign of changing its positions on the abduction issue. But North Korea has never changed its position since 2006. I don't think it's going to change now.
Right. So while the prospects then remain very low, Dr. Ban, as you mentioned, if the summit does take place and includes the abduction issue, the political gains for Prime Minister Kishida are very, very clear. That being said, what does North Korea's Kim Jong-un look to gain if such a summit does indeed take place?
Honestly, if that happens, Kim Jong-un's diplomatic landscape is expected to be much broader. As you all know, the Kim regime has been eager to make nuclear weapons for quite a long time. The 7 years of gray zone strategy for making nuclear weapons allowed Kim Jong-un to be finally armed with nuclear weapons. We need to pay attention to what he is doing right now after being fully armed with nuclear weapons. Two things are clear. One is to step up its nuclear coercion on the United States as well as South Korea to press these countries to take its request. This nuclear coercion is closely linked to guaranteeing its regime survival. Second, Kim Jong-un's attempts to play an enhanced role in the international arena while taking advantage of its status as a nuclear power, although it has not been recognized as an official nuclear power by international society. That explains why Kim Jong-un visited Russia last year, and North Korea has recently begun to intervene in many issues, including the Israeli-Hamas war. Meanwhile, this second objective is oriented toward expanding its diplomatic horizon. So, the North Korea-Japan summit is most likely to help Kim Jong-un achieve its goal of enhancing its diplomatic influence as a nuclear power. Moreover, this enhanced status is expected to help Kim Jong-un mitigate domestic grievances drawn from food crisis and economic poverty. In a nutshell, Kim Jong-un has a lot to achieve through this bilateral summit.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim, back to Seoul-Tokyo ties. Now, as Dr. Pan has mentioned, the actual prospects of a visit by Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to Seoul have yet to be formally acknowledged. But if it does occur, some pundits claim that Kishida's visit to Seoul, especially ahead of the parliamentary election here in the country in April, would reflect favorably on the Yoon administration. What are your thoughts?
Well, election and domestic politics in South Korea are well beyond my expertise, but let me share this. The joint public opinion survey that I just mentioned now, it shows very interesting trends. While the majority of both Korean and Japanese respondents say that bilateral relations are improving, this does not have the same impact on both countries. Specifically, Japanese perception towards South Korea has greatly improved, with 32.8% stating that their impression of Korea is favorable, the highest score ever since we started the survey. However, Korean perception toward Japan has slightly deteriorated from 2022 to 2023. The percentage of Koreans who responded favorable decreased from 30.4% to 28.9%. Through regression analysis, I found that two most powerful factor that led to South Koreans' unfavorability towards Japan were President Yoon's policy to improve Seoul-Tokyo ties and the Kishida administration policy toward South Korea. So what I can say is that Yoon government's Japan policy is not very popular in Korea. And the picture of President Yoon watching a Major League Baseball game in Seoul with Prime Minister Kishida will not help the ruling party that much during the general election in April, I believe.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, moving forward, Dr. Ban, late last year, there was much talk about the possibility of a trilateral summit among South Korea, Japan and China in the near future. Do you share this outlook? And should such a trilateral interaction take place, what issues do you believe should be addressed?
Well, South Korea as a host country has been enthusiastic about making a trilateral summit feasible since last year, as you noted. Japan has responded favorably to South Korea. Furthermore, China has sent a favorable signal to South Korea regarding a trilateral summit, although in general, South China seems away from the current South Korean administration. But at the same time, there seems no further advancements to this diplomatic journey at the moment. Why is that? Well, China appears to calculate several factors, such as general election in South Korea, the election in Japan, and the feasibility of Trump's return to the White House. In this respect, diplomatic efforts might be more active in the post-election period. Quite a number of agendas are expected to be dealt with if a trilateral summit takes place. The first issue is most likely to be the Taiwan issue because it serves as the most conflicting agenda between the three countries. China is most likely to press again South Korea and Japan to embrace its one China policy simply beyond respecting this policy. In contrast, South Korea and Japan are most likely to maintain their current position, which is their objection to a revisionist attempt by power regarding Taiwan. Second, North Korea's nuclear provocation should not be excluded. At this summit, they need to reconfirm that North Korea should be denuclearized and sanctions against North Korea need to be maintained without any glitch. Moreover, South Korea is likely to request China to step up its role in denuclearizing North Korea and deterring North Korea's provocations. Third, non-military cooperation could be on the agenda as well, which includes maritime cooperation and coordinated climate response. Finally, economic security could be on the list in a situation where the discourse of de-risking is in the works and the global supply chain is being redesigned.
Right, all these issues, if of course the trilateral summit does indeed take place. All right, Dr. Van, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Dr. Kim, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Right, well, that ends this week's editions of Issues and Insiders. We are looking ahead to a long weekend starting tomorrow, that is Friday, which marks Independence Movement Day here in Korea. See you next Monday.